That's all right. All right, so we'll go to 7.3, the internal audit work plan progress report. Nathan, do you want to speak to this item?
Thank you for that,
Yeah.
Chair. So this report has a couple of elements built into it. Attachment 1 is an summary of how we're tracking on our internal audit action plans. Because it's only been 8 weeks since the last one, there hasn't been a huge amount of tracking. We're still working, but we haven't had any actions completely closed out in the last 2 months, but we're still tracking well and hoping, to have things closed out by their due dates. We've also had a legislative compliance framework audit undertaken by Bentley's. That was actually a really good audit that was undertaken, and has given us some really good input into where we can improve some controls there. The other element is we've also had a audit done by Royal Life Saving Society, which is an aquatic facility safety audit. So the previous 4 years that's been undertaken in-house. However, management wanted to get externals in to undertake the audit. And then what we're hoping to do is bi-yearly we'll get externals, and then the alternating bi-yearly it will be done in-house. And that way we can keep up to track with changes with the guidelines of safe pool operations. So we're waiting for the final report to come back, but it is looking quite well. The other element in here is also the start of the development of our 3-year audit plan, which is looking at the audits that we'll be working on over the next 3 years. So we're lucky enough to have David Papa and Dongju from Bentley's to answer any queries or provide insight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mayor Redmond.
I'm looking at page 60 of 84 of the Bentley's report, the executive summary, and the last sentence. Based on the internal audit work completed, documents inspected and interviews with key stakeholders, it is our view the control environment for legislative compliance framework is partially ineffective. Can you explain what that means?
And I was going to say, if you wanted to sort of do a summary of the report as well and sort of kind of how you got to.
Yeah, I'll take care of that. Thank you. And Mayor Redmond will address that in due course. I guess the big takeaway, if I wrap up the entire project, is there is a lot happening. It's just not all tied together. That's the big takeaway. And the framework, and this may address that final point there, it's in regards to a legislative compliance framework, which is what the audit was to be over. There is, I wouldn't say it's a complete and tied in framework at this point. And so some of the governing documents that we're referring to, for example, policies, central registers, so on and so forth, are key components to completing this as a framework to ensure that there's an element of transparency, consistency, and overall awareness of legislative requirements across the organisation. So again, a lot is happening on the ground, but tying it together and making sure that it's aligned with other business processes, such as risk, operational activities, and so on, is really where we see the chance to enhance the whole legislative compliance area. And again, to the point of the framework, it's that tying together is what would take that framework beyond partially ineffective, hopefully to effective. A key part of that framework effectiveness is when it is all established in place. A lot of the recommendations and management are pretty open to them, as you'll see comments within the report as well, but conversations have been quite accepting that there is opportunity for enhancement. When a lot of those enhancements are achieved, I would suspect that would get you to that effective, at least mostly effective, if not effective state. Timing is subject to management's implementation.
Yeah. Okay.
So through the chair, so effectively, as I concur with David in the sense that the recommendations were acknowledged and accepted by the staff. again, so on page 67 of 84, we've actually provided those timeframes as to whether we, from a target date as to respond to the recommendations that have been put forward. So effectively, the first target date is December at the end of this calendar year, in the sense of making sure that we've actually got that framework and understanding that framework and that compliance policy. I think some of the things as well from my perspective, being new to the organisation, is that yes, there is good understanding of the legislative requirements for each individual business units and the individuals that are responsible for those business units. But as the audit identified, there's no framework that sort of makes that, it brings it together and makes it an organisational wide position rather than the individual that's actually in that role at that particular point in time, which is where we wanted to make sure that it's beyond the individuals, as opposed to it's from an organisational culture, and having that framework and having that understanding is where we actually want to get to with regard to I suppose that legislative compliance.
Will the audit committee have a report back in December and June next year to be able to see that the timelines are correct?
So obviously, as part of the quarterly meetings, we will have updates and part of monitoring the outcomes and the findings associated with each of the internal audits. So yes, we can, depending on where we're at with that, as to whether it's just from a update position or whether we actually present that as an attachment to that. Effectively those quarterly updates on the internal audit program anyway, as we go through the program.
There any other questions? No, that's the comment I was going to make, Nathan, when I'm assuming it's you putting together the policy and procedure. And that framework is really important, because you can't cover off on everything in compliance, and you don't want to, because you've got to make sure you've got a risk-based approach, and you know you've got the evidence there that there is a compliance system in place, that you are doing your best to comply with the legislation regulations, but there's no way that you can, you know, people make the mistake that they try and are compliant with every legal aspect section possible, and that's not what this is about. It's about a framework to make sure that that there's a risk-based process in place. All right, is there any other comments on that report, David?
No, that's really it, and I'll echo that again. It's a risk-based approach is key. I don't know how many hundreds of pieces of legislation you're obligated to monitor at any given point in time, and I do agree. Good luck. And that risk assessment, which is where I was saying before, connecting that framework into your risk management process, for example, is actually quite a critical step too. And I know there's a lot of work happening in that space at the moment, so we're helping you out with that. That's just a really good example of where you can tie a few pieces together and get a really positive and well-defined outcome of what needs to be done. So yeah, thanks. That's it for this report, unless there's any more questions.
Yeah, Peter, did you have?
Thank you, Chair. My question is really, given resources are limited, are there any areas that you would think are higher priorities than others that need to be addressed?
Peter, if I can clarify, you're talking about legislative areas as such? Yeah, our review didn't get into the pieces of legislation and the gaps that were there. It was really about looking at what systems you have to identify that yourselves. That scope is massive, well beyond the week and a half or 2 weeks that were allocated to this project. Yeah, we haven't, because we couldn't fit it in. That was the case. Yeah, correct. And we're hoping a framework such as this will actually bring some of those gaps to the surface, and then you'll be able to self-manage. I think that's the plan.
And of course, the framework is an evolving document, so it doesn't have to be perfect straight up. You just need to have something in place, and then, you know, it evolves over time as you know, get better and better at it. Okay, now that was internal audit. Now we also had, there's a scope for the internal audit plan, so that's currently under development. Is that right? Bentley, did you want to talk to that at all?
Yeah, can do. Thank you. The plan, you know, we were fortunate enough to be involved in this 3-4 years ago when there was a plan being built. It's not an overly dissimilar process. We still want to have a look at, so we want to reach out to the various parts and aspects of the business that will help influence an audit plan for assurance. Ultimately, we will look at what's going on, a little bit of strategy, looking at understanding of operations. But the big piece of work that we really want to bring into this is the risk work. And I know Nathan's doing an incredible amount of work with the team in regards to identifying risks. So once that risk identification process is done in about a month or so's time, I think we're looking to wrap that up. We want to use that data as well to see where there is quite a robust reliance on controls, and therefore they're the controls that the committee need assurance on ultimately from an internal audit perspective. So our approach really is to pull data, have some good conversations, and then come back with a proposed plan accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions or comments? No, I think it'd be good, agree with your approach, the risk-based approach, internal audit plan, and also making sure that that plan is agile. I had a discussion at an audit committee last week that, you know, members were worried that the 3-year internal audit plan couldn't be completed. And it's not about completing, it's about making sure you've got a risk-based sort of menu of internal audit. And it doesn't have to be the tick and bash, you know, traditional approach. It can be deep dives, it can be process improvement reviews, it can be all types of reviews. But I think as an audit committee, we have to make sure that it is agile. And sometimes you do have projects on the plan that no longer are applicable, and whether, you know, you can bring things forward, push things back. But it's really important with your knowledge from the risk work that you've done is to identify, and your understanding of the business, is to identify the possible projects that can be completed over the next 3 years, and to capture that in the one document that we can work off over 3 years.
A couple for the committee's knowledge, a couple of keys to our approach. Our preferred approach is we will have regular checkpoint meetings with Sharon and Nathan in particular to understand what's going on, if anything's changed, to make amendments to the plan. I'd also hope that we could come here at least annually with the plan as it is, and you'll see potentially what projects are coming up in the normal committee. I'll leave that up to you to determine. But if we're here annually with a review of the upcoming plan, it always remains relatively fresh. So that's certainly our preferred approach, and I hope that's the way that we can work with the management team and the committee to make sure that you are getting what you need, because I agree with you, 3 years is a long time.
You look at the last 3 years.
Yeah, correct. Exactly right.
Anything?
So hopefully they're some of the mechanisms that we like to put in our program engagements, so we can make sure that we're continually relevant.
Okay, and then just last thing, if we just jump back up to the internal audit action plan, did anyone have any comments on the progress of the internal audit recommendations from prior internal audit reviews? Yeah, Christine?
Just one thing, sometimes the explanations refer to the future, but the date might be in the past. So page 52 was one where it talks about November 2022 being in the future. So I think possibly it just needs a bit of proofreading to update things. And it looked like the latest action was only in about March or April. So it just looked like the report was a bit out of date.
Yeah. Did you want to make any comment, Nathan, or put you on the spot?
No, I take that on board. Yeah, we'll make sure we do proofread it. But because I've talked with some of the action owners and they just said, look, we've been that flat out. We haven't completed. We are still trending and working our way. It's just because it's only been 8 weeks between. We just haven't had a lot of time because some of these actions are 3-year actions. Yeah.
On that, I found it on page 52. So point 3, it talks about due date November 2022, so that's fine, you might be behind. But then the progress status is meeting has been scheduled for November 2022, as if that's in the future. So that's what I mean. It just needs a bit of proofreading on the dates, because it's talking about some dates that are in the past as if they're in the future.
And they're easy fixes, so easy wins. We realise that you've been very busy doing risk management frameworks, et cetera, so it's all about priorities. All right, any other comments for 7.3? No, we're all good. Well, thank you, Bentleys, for all your hard work, and we'll see you at a future meeting. Don't know what I'll do, move back to. Oh, okay, so do I have a mover for 7.3? Christine, a seconder, councillor Bosch, I've gone blank, all in favour. Carried unanimously, sorry, I'm just. Don't assume anything. Okay, that was 7.3. All right, we go back up. All right, so go to a 6.1, which is the FY23 Audit and Risk Committee Annual Report. Sharon, did you want to speak to this? Because Kesha's here. Help you.
Just for the benefit of the committee, Lakesh has resigned from the council.
What?
So yeah, so he finished up yesterday. So
Oh my God.
so yeah, so Lakesh, who's the manager of finance and procurement. So so yes, so that's why he's not here tonight.
Wow. Sudden.
Yes. Yeah, so obviously, as a requirement of the Act, that the Risk and Audit Committee is required to prepare an annual report. And then that annual report gets presented to the council as well. So again, pretty much it's just a progress of the items that have been considered by the council, the Audit and Risk Committee during the year. It's fairly self-explanatory. I'll have to say that it's based on last year's report.
Yep.
And all that sort of stuff. So just in the same format, and just realistically sets out what you've addressed and the status of the outcomes with regard to the resolutions that have been passed as associated with those items addressed during the year.
All right, councillor Bosch.
Yeah, just reading through it, are there any implications in this report stemming from the budget that was adopted the other night? Some of the issues in here don't ring that true anymore. For example, page 13 of 83, that council's looking to be back in surplus in 3 years. Well, probably not then.
Obviously that was a recommendation of the Audit and Risk to the council. So I don't think that actually needs to change, because that was from your perspective, that was your recommendation as a committee to the council. Whether the council chose to adopt it, I suppose is out of your hands. But that, so I wouldn't change it, because that was your recommendation to the council.
Suggest in this historical report, we leave that as it is. But when we get to the agenda item about budget, maybe we discuss that further.
Yeah, when I read this, it just.
sorry, through the chair, but again, that was the recommendation at that point in time, and that's what you're actually reporting back to the council as to, in your report, in reviewing the draft plan, that was what your recommendation was.
Just a question, this lists the, what we did at the various, committee meetings. Is it normal to talk about, we also attended some workshops like the risk one and I can't remember what else, just to show what other work we've been doing?
Through the chair, so we can actually amend the report and amend the recommendation as amended to include the workshops that were also attended during the year.
One really small one on page 7, it says the Audit and Risk Committee met on 6(5) occasions. Just need to fix that.
Are there any other questions or comments? Are you happy with it? All right. We go. So we have a officer's recommendation that the Audit and Risk Committee receive and note the FY23 Audit Committee Work Plan Progress Report as amended to include attendance at workshops. And that 2, the Audit and Risk Committee, having considered and endorsed the FY23 Audit and Risk Committee Annual Report as contained in attachment 1, recommends to council that the annual report be received and noted.
Can we just add something like, amended for the workshops attended by
Put that
committee members? Oh,
number
sorry,
1.
it's already up there.
Yep.
Fine.
And it's very fast.
You're ahead of me.
Yes. All right. Do I have a mover? Peter, seconder? Christine, all in favour? Carried unanimously. All right, then we move on to 6.2, which is the FY24 Audit and Risk Committee Work Plan. Sharon, did you want to talk to that?
So you will note that there's probably a bit of a change in the presentation of the work plan. Obviously with the changes in the scope of the requirements and the exposures that the audit and risk are now required to review under the Act, or effectively from November, but your terms of reference has actually been updated to reflect those. So we actually went through and reviewed the work plan to ensure that there was that linkage back through to the activities that were are required by the terms of reference and the legislation. And as we go through, we will provide the status update of the reports and the outcomes of those reports as we go through the years when we provide updates.
Councillor Kosh.
Be a reoccurring theme all night, but I know that the Risk and Audit Committee is going to provide a whole lot of recommendations. If the council doesn't accept those recommendations, where does this committee stand? Legislatively, it's got to do a whole range of things, but if the council doesn't accept those, what's the ramifications? It's just, yeah.
Peter, Christine, anyone want to comment on that?
There's no confusion there. We're an advisory sort of body, but it can be ignored. There's no law that says you have to adopt everything that the audit committee says. Be lovely if you did, but that's the reality, I guess.
Well, I mean, I won't take it personally, but yeah, we do work hard and we do recommend what we feel is best for the council. Now, if the council doesn't agree with us, then Peter said, we're an advisory committee.
Yeah, just for the comment, I guess, at the end of the day, if the audit committee provides advice and then later on it's found that, it was ignored and there was something that happened that, if they'd taken the advice, then that would have happened. That would look very bad on the organisation. I guess that's one of the measures that I guess elected members got to take into account when they make decisions of their own. That's right.
My views, I don't think a lot of councillors understand that. I don't understand the risk, because I suppose the budget, we're going to look at the budget later on, but that's probably going to go to SCOSA, and I don't know what the ramifications are going to be, with SCOSA looking at it. So I don't know whether they understand the ramifications of not taking the advice of the audit committee.
Yep, okay, Redmond.
I think that's a really good point, and that will happen next year in August or the second half of next year. And I think that will be the ramification. I think that will be the trigger. And if SCOSA choose to look at the recommendations from the Audit and Risk Committee, which I think it would be very wise to do so, I think that council should really consider that very seriously.
Any other comments?
Yeah, well, I mean, in relation to that, that was really in my mind behind moving the resolution last time about reducing the budget deficits and making some attempt to do that, because I was aware that we're in line for a SCOSA review. But even those reviews don't have any sort of legal course of action, so they can be ignored, but it becomes more public if you do. So yeah, I mean, there are consequences potentially, if council doesn't manage their resources appropriately, because running a deficit is just deferring to another generation effectively to pay for what you want. So it's you can't go on indefinitely. That's the point, I guess.
Yes, noted. All right, so we have an officer's recommendation that the Audit and Risk Committee, number 1, adopt the proposed FY24 Audit and Risk Committee work plan. Number 2, sets the ordinary meeting dates of the committee for the remainder of FY24 for 17th of October, 6th of February 24 and 14th of May 24. And 3, notes that subject to the FY25 budget timetable, a special committee meeting be called during March 24 for the purpose of reviewing the draft FY25 budget, like we did this year. Do I have a mover? Christine, seconder. Peter, all in favour? Carried unanimously. All right, item 6.3 is the risk management update. Nathan, did you want to comment on it?
Thank you for that. So since the endorsement of the risk management framework, we've rolled out enterprise risk management training for the entire leadership team. We are currently starting to review our strategic risks aligned to the community plan. Also identifying, reviewing our operational risks in line with our business plans. And when we're doing that, we've also created a new category where an operational risk has been uplifted to a corporate risk. So instead of referencing the same risk against multiple teams or divisions, it's becoming a corporate risk. So what we're anticipating is working with exec, but then also bringing that back to the Audit and Risk Committee to review the draft strategic risk register with controls, and then also the corporate risk register. And then at the same time have Bentley's here to also look at the 3-year audit plan. So that way we can sort of overlay them all, so you can get a clear picture of strategic risk, corporate risk, but also what controls are in place, but also where would you like assurances that these controls are in place and working effectively. So it's sort of a 3-layer thing that we're doing at the moment. At the same time, while we're doing that, we're trying to build a control library. So for the financial ones, control libraries from the better practice model, we're trying to duplicate that, but from a risk management perspective, because that will work fantastically in risk manager or control track. And I can see Natalie smiling. You get the idea
Right.
where we're going.
Just like how excited you are about risk.
It's just time consuming. It's just we're chipping away at it. So that's what we've been working on over the last sort of 6 weeks. But we've also updated and reviewed the risk management policy in line with the enterprise risk framework. So attached to this is a proposed new version of the risk policy and also the old version, because when I did the mapping, the track changes went funny in the old version because just the version of Word went funny. So sorry about having 2 copies and killing paper. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Christine, Peter? No? Looking good. There you go, Nathan. It's looking good. There's no questions or comments. Wow. So well done. There's a lot of work that's gone into that, and it's really exciting to see how it's evolving. From when you think where we were a year ago, 18 months ago. And now you've got sort of the compliance element as well to layer on top. I mean, it's working really well. So well done. All right, so I've got an office recommendation that the Audit and Risk Committee recommends to Council that 1, the risk management update report be noted, 2, the risk management policy as contained in attachment 1 be adopted, and 3, the Chief Executive Officer be authorised to make changes of a minor or technical nature to the policy adopted by Council. Do I have a mover? Christine, seconder? Councillor Koch, all in favour? Carried unanimously. All right, now we're heading to the information reports. So we have item 7.1, which is the FY24 adopted budget. Sharon, did you want to speak to this item?
Through the chair. So obviously this report's been presented to give the, I suppose, close the loop with the committee regarding the adoption of the 23-24 budget. As set out in the report, the council, I suppose the adopted budget from the council actually modified the recommended position with regard to the rate revenue increase and reduced that from 6.5 to 5%. There is a slight change from the 6.5 to the 7 was because in the end we actually ended up with 2% new development growth. So that's why the difference from the 7% to the 6.5. And to offset that revenue increase, there was a reduction in the operating or the new initiatives to actually reduce to have the same operating deficit. So notwithstanding that, I've also included and presented to the council what the implications were for the future position of the council and their desire or the audit committee's recommendation to actually return to a operating surplus position within 3 years. And while on the surface, it appears as though that the budget is exactly the same as what was recommended, the implications for the future years are not the same. And as Peter mentioned, effectively what we're actually doing is transferring the burden to the future generations, because at some point in time, there is going to be a need to increase rate revenue or to increase our revenue source, or to significantly impact our delivery, our service delivery, which effectively is going to impact the future generations of the council. I think the key thing with regard to the current position of the budget is effectively that rate revenue reduction has turned our current operations from a small surplus position to an operating deficit position, which is effectively something that I suppose around the table is one of the key priorities that we should actually be identifying and making sure that that surplus is sufficient to, I suppose, fund all the new initiatives that we as a council want to do, but also to ensure that we have sufficient, I suppose, cash flow within the business to actually make sure that we can actually pay down debt whenever the need or the opportunity arises, but also be able to withhold any financial shock that may happen in the future during the year. So obviously the base position for future years has been reduced significantly. And again, yes, and I think that while the general principles of returning a strategy to return us back to a operating surplus within 3 years, and if you look at the graph, technically we still are, but it's very minor. It's nothing, it's not necessarily anything to write home about. And that effectively it based on if the council, in considering next year's budget, chooses to have a particular revenue increase that's set out in the long-term financial plan, it will still push back for another 12 months before we actually return back to a surplus position. So yeah, so it's more just for your information, just so you're aware of the position of the council, and what was ended being adopted, and the implications for that for the council going forward.
All right, thank you. Mayor Redmond.
Thank you for that, Sharon. On page 36, you stated a 1.5% reduction in rate revenue will result in an operating deficit of $191,500 from core operations, which does not meet sound and responsible financial management. What are the core operations? Which part of that will touch our core operations?
So effectively, core operations are, I suppose, what I would define our continuing services. So waste collection, maintenance of roads, maintenance of our reserves and parks, provision of our library services, street sweeping, litter but, general, our ability, DA. So all those legislative and services that we provide, even our events and our community, running the community centre, this facility is probably one of those core services as well. So it's just those existing services and programs that we actually offer to the community, and we have continued to offer and has become an expectation of the community that this is the core level of what is actually provided for what our rates contribute to. Again, it's also impacts on potential capacity to renew assets, because effectively we don't necessarily have that cash to do that maintenance.
Any other questions?
Just as a comment initially, when I read this, I was concerned to see that the revenue percentage increase had been decreased below inflation even. So I was concerned to see that. I believe Gawler Council has spent quite a lot of time and effort in getting the financials back into a reasonable position, because I think historically we had losses for quite some time. And so I guess concerned and disappointed that council decided to increase the rates by less than inflation, resulting in, let's call it a core loss, against what the Audit and Risk Committee recommended to the council. So I'm thinking it might be appropriate for us to communicate to council our concern and disappointment, and maybe make some comment about what the impact is going to be on the future years and Gawler's ability to actually get back into a surplus. I mean, they can choose to ignore it, but I don't think it would hurt just to do some correspondence to council to say that we're concerned and maybe to comment the impact could be in the future, losses, that sort of thing. We have to work on the wording, but the gist of it is some correspondence. That's the question.
Look, I agree with that because when I came onto council 12 years ago, we were borrowing money for operations. I think it was $3 million for operations. And then we worked and worked and worked and got the debt down and down and we could do some things. And now all I can see is the debt going back up. Potentially we're going to borrow money for operations again to cover those core services. And, you know, it's not a very happy position to be in. Especially when we're not even, the rate increase doesn't even cover inflation. I mean, that's the craziest thing. That's like, that's the craziest thing.
Yeah, I'm actually quite concerned, you know, from core operations, which does not meet sound and responsible financial management. I think we need some strong guidance from the independent audit committee members to advise council on the way forward from here. And I think I support the idea of doing some correspondence to council. And I think that we worked exceptionally hard to get our debt down. And there were 4 lots of $3 million on long-term loans ranging from 7% per annum, etc. And so we're still paying those off. They're still not quite paid off. And although the debt has been reduced quite substantially, however, we now, according to Ms. Perkins, and I agree with her comments, that we don't have the capacity to withstand shocks. It could be flooding, it could be a whole range of things. And how do we withstand that? So I think that it really, I would really appreciate the independent members writing to council and providing some advice.
Yep. Christine? Oh, did you have a question? No.
I want to hear from Peter first.
Peter.
Yeah, well, I mean, I support that. You can do it diplomatically. It is, I mean, as Sharon's eloquently pointed out, it's a short-term saving for a long-term, you know, cost really. And it's a one-off. You're embedding a recurrent loss of revenue for a single year cost savings. So it does work, and really in order to get back to square one, you've got to increase rates by 1.5% next year over above what you would have done anyway, and then you're back to where you would be. And I don't really think the elected members could have seen that perspective. So I think it's worth no? Yeah, they do. Okay. Yeah. 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 Well, all you can do is, I mean, there's a risk of poking the monster, as it were. But nevertheless, I think there is still merit in making a suggestion like we've been discussing, because to ignore it, you know, means the record of advice is damaged, I suppose. And as it was pointed out earlier, SCOSA will be walking in here in a year or two. When is it they're due to come? Next year. So August 24. Okay. They will be looking at the past and your plans, long-term financial plan for the future. Yeah. 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 Their advice doesn't carry any, you know, force.
But it is public.
It is
And
public,
it
yeah,
can produce quite a risk of reputational damage.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been just working with a council that has, both through the COVID times and prior to that, they had no debt. And they felt they needed to be gracious to their community, so they cut the rates by 2% a year in real terms, for 4 years. And now they've got a debt because they had actually savings when interest rates were zero. They had many millions of dollars of savings, and now they're going exactly the opposite way around. And their forecast long-term plan has got deficits out for, it only balances in year 10, and their net financial liabilities is over 100%. And they've just had a SCOSA review, and they've basically, the SCOSA review was done on the previous, and they've just made it worse since the SCOSA review. And it's just, you know, absurd. It's funny. But so anyway, that's not you guys. That's, I think you've got a better community.
I think what I want to say is that I thought that a council's responsibilities was to have a financially sustainable budget, and that was actually a requirement of the Act.
Mhm.
So I don't know where we sit now if SCOSA says, you know, we haven't got a, you know, financially sustainable budget, we're not moving forward properly. I don't know where that sits with the elected members. That's probably, with the Act, they've sort of made a breach.
I can see a day coming, because I've seen a number of councils running deficits and things, that the next stage is for the state government to pass a law that deficits are illegal. You know, you can't have a deficit, and maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, before we get, I think what I wanted to say was that it's very disappointing because the independent members spend a lot of time. We came in for extra meetings in order to discuss the budget and work out where the council needed to be financially in order to be successful. I haven't been around as long as Peter has, but I mean, it's really hard when you've seen, you know, walking out of debt, you know, 12 years ago, as Councillor Kosh was saying. The council's done a great job in clawing its way back. It's a very slippery slope, and I'm concerned that that, you know, this time next year we're going to be in a whole world of pain. And the only solution would be to increase rates even higher. And you have no choice rather than, and I've been involved, as you know, Peter says, I've been involved in other councils that there was a year that they didn't increase rates. They were being kind to their members, to the council, and then that it was just a world of pain the following year, and they had no choice but to increase them significantly and way above every other council, way above inflation. And as Mayor Redmond said, it's a reputational risk. So, and SCOSA, you know, that'll become public. And the elected members have to live with consequences of that. So as we were saying before, we're an advisory committee. We're all professionals in our field, and we provide our expert opinion on what the council needs to do in order to operate effectively from a financial perspective. That opinion has been ignored by council or decided, not to be adhered to. And so we, in our officer's recommendation, we will write to council. However, as I said, I feel it's very disappointing. And I'm concerned as to where we'll be sitting this time next year.
I think that the elected members they think that they're going to get out of it next year by doing some fancy financial, and I think that they're not quite understanding just the impact of this reduction below inflation. And I don't believe that we will get out of it. And they have been advised that we won't get out of it. But they think that somehow magically it will disappear next year when they look at the budget again. So I think that there needs to be some hard-hitting facts in that letter to understand the impact, the financial impact of this, and how we will need to get out of this hole next year, which would have to be an increase in rates. And I think that's really unfair to future ratepayers. So I support this motion. I think there may need to be a comment made around getting back to surplus. And I think that hopefully when you write the letter, Chair, that there is comment made around getting back to surplus. Because I think that's really important, and I agree with you, Peter, that there are councils, and we're running a deficit of $1 million, and they didn't take it off the deficit; they took it off the rates, and that just makes it even worse. And it's unfortunate, but we need some really serious professional advice on how we can get back on track.
Adam?
I guess the issue is about getting the deficit under control, and it can be done in two ways, not necessarily a rate increase. And it may be that these people are coming from a frustration that they think their rates are too high. And maybe there needs to be some work to demonstrate that they are or they aren't compared to other contemporary councils, like councils. So I guess we don't want to make it sound just like we're saying increase rates again, because there are other options as well. Just needs to be. Yeah.
About the rate increase being less than inflation. Because I think ratepayers probably would expect that their rates would go up by inflation. And now they'll get a pleasant surprise, I suppose. And I guess the other comment around, let's call it now a structural deficit in this council. When you've got a structural deficit, it means you have to borrow more in an economy with high and increasing interest rates. So concerned about that.
Not the hours. think also you need to note what levers you can pull. And as we discussed before, that, you know, that's fine. You can keep your rates, increase in rates below inflation, but in order to compensate, as Peter was saying, is that there's going to be a huge reduction in the level of service the council provides the community. And that's going to be, you know, I think, especially in the historical area of Gawler, with, you know, just so much tradition, that's going to be really disappointing that that will impact the legacy. Right. All right, are there any other questions or comments before we go to the recommendation? So what we've said here is the officer's recommendation number 1, that the Audit and Risk Committee notes the FY24 annual business plan and budget considered and adopted by council at the ordinary council meeting held on the 27th of June 23. And 2, this has been added in today, is that the Audit and Risk Committee write to council to express their concern with the reduction of the rate revenue increase from 6.5% as per the staff recommendation and the recommendation of the committee to 5% when adopting the FY24 annual budget. The basis of this concern is driven by the financial impact the reduction in rate revenue collected will have on the future financial position, and hence the extended time frame it will take for council to return to an operating surplus position. Just Anna, just remove that extra "the" after, no, before, hence. That second last line. So, and hence. Yep, perfect. All right, do I have a mover? Peter, seconder, Christine, all in favour? Carried unanimously. And item 7.2 is business improvement, savings and efficiency update. Sharon, did you want to speak to this one?
Through the chair, so as council administration has a group that looks at business improvement and saving and efficiency projects to be addressed during the financial year. So a financial target of $300,000 was set. This is also linked to one of Henry's KPIs as well. So just an update as to where we are with regard to the savings as at the end of May. So today there's been around about just shy of $400,000 of savings realised compared to the 364,000 that was realised last year. So these savings are a combination of ongoing operating savings, but also some reductions that we've actually or savings delivered that through procurement activities relating to some capital spend as well. So while they probably don't have any ongoing, the extent of the ongoing savings, but it does actually have some future impact on us in relation to, obviously, by being able to deliver capital projects at a reduced spend. We haven't had the need to obviously borrow, and then effectively it has that flow on impact to our future depreciation because we're managed to actually undertake a project for less than what we actually anticipated it to be. In addition to obviously there's tangible savings, there's been a number of projects that we've actually worked on during the year with the view of actually providing some efficiencies in the processes that don't necessarily have a direct bottom line impact, but it provides opportunities to do more with existing resources because we've actually created those efficiencies, or alternatively, we've looked at processes and functions that we do that potentially add value to the community, because effectively the process that they have to actually go through to I suppose, interact with council is actually improved, like, for example, the section 221 permits is one of those examples. And even in relation to the customer request from that, the community safety improvements, not necessarily delivered a direct bottom line impact, but effectively our responsiveness to the community in dealing with those community safety issues, it has improved, which provides value. So yeah, so there's an internal working group that meets quarterly to actually to monitor where we're going with this. And again, we'll continue on in the 23-24 financial year. Obviously, there is a greater emphasis on trying to achieve savings and efficiencies this year, considering that notwithstanding what the current budget had already incorporated a substantial amount of savings within it. And also, in addition to that, we've also, from an EA increase, obviously we did have an EA increase because it was based on the March CPI, which is higher than what we actually anticipated in the budget. But obviously from an administration perspective, we've committed to actually make those additional savings on top of the recommendations from the audit committee as to the level of savings that they recommended that we incorporate within the budget as well. So yeah, so it will probably have greater emphasis this coming financial year, and we'll do our best to achieve the outcomes. But so yeah.
Any questions or comments, Christine?
Just a question, are there any other opportunities to form alliances with other councils or LGA to make savings such as what you've already done with the SAI global subscription?
Through the chair, I suppose we haven't really necessarily identified anything at this point in time, but that's pretty much our mindset from an administration perspective. And also because we're actually dealing with particularly Adelaide Plains and some other regional councils where they're probably the same, that they don't have the economies of scale to do some of those things. So we always put the call out to sit there and say if they actually want to join with us and there is a regular group that networks together from a procurement perspective to sit there and say, is there any opportunities from any procurement activities that are actually on the radar that we can actually join forces together to ensure that we actually get, I suppose, to deliver a better outcome for everyone. So.
Any other questions, Peter?
Yeah, I'll just comment on, I think what the council's doing in this area is right on the mark, and it's good to see it continuing. It sort of never ends, this sort of stuff, I suppose. I was going to say, what about amalgamations? But maybe that's not good.
Not funny, Peter.
Okay. All right, no other questions or comments. Given but the recommendation that the audit committee that recommending 5.3 Viva and then contributed 7.4 the local government in the 5. Through the chair, so this is so effectively this is a result of the local government review with the changes that have been implemented over to the local market over the last 12 to 18 months. So the last lot of changes are coming into effect over the next 6 months. Predominantly, most of those are coming through in November and relate to the functions of the audit committee. However, given the pending that we knew that these payments were coming in, so effectively we actually re-established the audit committee and determined the terms of reference and the membership and of that committee. We incorporated those changes, so we're effectively in that new regime now. And then there's just a few other minor things that come into effect on over the next couple of months. It's very administrative changes that were across. I think that one of the big things that as part of the audit committee, so now there is a requirement for the audit and risk committee work plan or annual report back to council to actually be incorporated into the council's annual report as well. So that and we'll incorporate that into as well. So all those major the other major change is with regard to the requirement of having a separate funding plan in the long-term financial plan. So how probably be more explicit in how the council actually plans to fund the long-term financial plan. So I suppose that probably provides another opportunity or I think the audit committee as well to participate in that review of the long-term financial plan and provide the advice back to the committee, back to the council as to what the implications are with regard to what's better to commence that review of the long-term financial plan. So we've got the recommendation that you'll notice the implementation. So it's got the committee button, so I can video. You can get the what do I have? Okay, so I made the item for discussion. I have 9 questions without notice. I have 10 motions without notice. Okay. So we plan to go to the proposed meeting at 8:12 p.m. The next meeting on Tuesday.